They dumped me in a nursing home like yesterday's garbage, but what they didn't know is that I wasn't done yet. Before you hear the whole story, hit that subscribe button and tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? I want to know where my sisters are tuning in. Now let me take you back to the moment everything changed. The day they took me away, the sky was a flat, ugly gray, the kind that presses down on your chest like bad news before it even lands. I should have known something was wrong. Karen had called that morning, sweet as sugar pie, saying she was coming over with David and Luke to help me organize some things. Help. I should have known better. I sat at the kitchen table, the same one where I used to braid their hair, teach them how to do math homework, serve birthday cake. I'd even set out 4 cups of coffee, like it was some kind of family meeting. Silly me. I was wearing my pink sweater, the one George used to say brought out the color in my cheeks. I remember adjusting my lipstick in the toaster reflection. Isn't that funny? I wanted to look nice. For my children. I still wanted to be loved by them. The door slammed harder than it needed to. Karen walked in first, brisk and businesslike, wearing that tight expression she always had when she was lying. David followed, phone in hand, not looking up. Luke came last, holding some papers. I didn't like the look of them. Mom, Karen started, we've been talking. That's how it always begins, isn't it? When they're about to rip your world apart. She explained it in a voice you'd use with a child, soft, patronizing. Said they'd found a wonderful place for me, a resort-style living facility in the hill country. Sounded like a damn spa commercial. I blinked, heart pounding, trying to understand. I'm not going anywhere, I said calmly. This is my home. Luke cleared his throat and slid the papers across the table. Mom, you've been forgetting things. We're just trying to protect you. Protect me? From what? My own life? I wanted to scream, to throw that stack of betrayal back in their faces. But instead, I stared at my hands. The same hands that had packed their lunches, stitched their Halloween costumes, held them during fevers and nightmares. Hands that had worked 2 jobs after George died, just to keep this roof over our heads. You already signed the power of attorney papers, Karen said softly. That's when my knees buckled. I didn't remember signing anything, but I had been tired. There were times when the days blurred, when I'd misplaced things. Nothing dangerous, just little slips. I trusted them. They were my babies. I never thought they'd use it against me. Within an hour, my bags were packed. They didn't even let me pick out which photo frames to take. Just one suitcase. That house, my house, full of memories, of love and sweat and heartache. They took it all from me in an afternoon. The ride to the nursing home was quiet. David drove. Karen sat beside him, tapping away on her phone. Luke stayed with me in the back, but he didn't look me in the eye. Not once. Mom, you'll love it there. They have bingo nights and movie screenings, he muttered. I wanted to laugh, or slap him. I did neither. We pulled into a beige complex tucked between a gas station and a dry cleaner. No trees, no garden, just pavement and beige walls. A woman in scrubs came out with a clipboard. She smiled too hard. That first night, I cried like a child. I pressed my pillow over my face to muffle the sound. I cried not because of the room or the cold sheets or the tasteless food. I cried because they'd stopped seeing me as a person. To them, I was just an obstacle, a burden to be moved. But let me tell you something. I'm not one for staying down. It took me a few weeks to stop being angry. I stayed quiet, observed. I saw the staff, kind but overworked. I saw the other residents, ghosts in cardigans, silent companions in the waiting room of life. But I also saw something else. I saw Ruth. She was in the common area, playing poker with a nurse, cackling like a villain in an old western. You bet your lunch money on that hand, baby, she shouted, slapping down her cards. I smiled. First time in weeks. She noticed. You knew? She asked, tilting her head. You've got that freshly betrayed by family look. I laughed, actually laughed. And just like that, Ruth pulled me in. Then came Dottie, sweet as pie but sharp as a tack. Used to be a school librarian in Vermont. She noticed everything. Then Maxine, tough, tall, with eyes like she'd seen it all and lived to tell. Turns out she used to teach law at a community college before a fall messed up her hip. We started sitting together at meals, then at games. Then late at night in the lounge, sipping tea and telling stories. One night, I told them what happened to me. About the betrayal. About my house. Maxine leaned back and raised an eyebrow. Did you sign over the deed? I shook my head. No, I think I still own it. Legally. Ruth let out a whistle. Honey, if that's true, you've got gold under your feet and fire in your hands. That's when it started. The glimmer of an idea. A flicker of rebellion in a place built on surrender. I wasn't just going to sit there and rot. If they thought they'd thrown me away, they were about to learn exactly who they'd messed with. I was Eleanor Grace Miller, mother, widow, survivor, and I was about to set the world on fire. It started with a drawer. Room in Oak Hills. Senior living was just big enough for a twin bed, a dresser, and a narrow closet that smelled faintly of antiseptic and peppermint gum. I had unpacked my single suitcase with a kind of robotic numbness until I opened that last drawer and found it tucked in the corner. My old leather folio, the one I used to keep important papers in. My fingers trembled as I unzipped it. Inside was the original deed to my house, still in my name. Still legal. No signature from Karen. No stamp from a notary. Just mine. I sat down hard on the bed, the papers shaking in my lap. All the emotions I'd buried, shame, heartbreak, rage, came rushing back in a flood. My children had planned to sell my house. They hadn't done it out of love or concern. They wanted my home for themselves, probably to fix it up and sell it to some young couple for a profit. I clutched that deed like it was the last piece of me they hadn't stolen. And for the first time since George's funeral, I prayed. Not for strength, not for peace. I prayed for clarity, for a sign. And it came the next morning. Ruth barreled into the dining hall, wearing her lavender sweater with the rhinestone buttons. Guess who's back from her son's wedding? Maxine. And she's got stories. That was how Maxine rejoined our little circle. She'd been gone for a week to attend her youngest son's wedding in Austin. And from the way she rolled her eyes while pouring her black coffee, it hadn't gone well. New wife's a Botox doll, she muttered. Wouldn't know a book if it hit her in her lip fillers. We laughed, but I was distracted. I waited until breakfast was done, until the nurses had turned their attention to the resident who kept trying to flush magazines down the toilet, and I pulled Maxine aside. I need your help, I whispered. That afternoon, in the privacy of Maxine's room, she had a private, of course, she always found a way. We spread the documents across her desk. She looked at the deed, the copy of my will, and the medical POA that I now remembered vaguely signing after a bad fall last year. Right after Karen had come over with Chinese food and an urgent form. You didn't sign over the title, Maxine confirmed, tapping her red nails on the page. They have control over your medical decisions, sure. But the house? Still yours. My heart thudded. Can they still sell it? If they try, and you catch it in time? No, but if they forge your signature, she trailed off. I gritted my teeth. Then I need to sell it first. She looked at me like I'd just grown wings. You serious? I want to sell my house. Take that money and get out of here. I want to live before I die, Maxine. And then she did something I didn't expect. She smiled. It took a few days to work out the details. We roped in Ruth, who claimed she once dated a real estate agent and still had his number, though he's probably bald and divorced now. Dottie helped us navigate the facility phone rules and set up a Gmail account on the community center's public computer. Maxine made the real calls, the legal ones, the financial ones, and with every step, I felt like I was waking up from a long, drugged dream. Every time I walked past the nurse's station, I smiled. Every time Karen called to check in with her fake sweet voice, I played the part of the docile mother, grateful and declining visitors. But in truth, I was preparing my exit. The sale went fast. Turns out, my neighborhood was a hot spot for tech workers and young families. The buyer offered full asking price within hours of the listing. I didn't even have to meet them. The transaction happened through Maxine's old law contact, Jack Winston, a grumpy but brilliant old man who still owed her a favor from a case, and we wired the money to a new account in my name. Dottie had helped me set it up online, using the facility's public Wi-Fi. It wasn't hard. No one suspects little old ladies of plotting revolutions. But the final step was the hardest. I had to disappear before they found out. We picked a Friday night. Most of the staff would be distracted with bingo night in the rec room, and Ruth had bribed one of the younger aides with a bottle of perfume and a pizza to forget checking in en route. I had one small suitcase, my passport, a printed itinerary, and 3 one-way plane tickets. I left a single note on my pillow. Don't look for me. I've gone to find the life you stole from me. Eleanor. We rode in silence to the airport, the 3 of us crammed into an Uber with broken air conditioning and a driver who didn't ask questions. The terminal lights felt like heaven. I had to bite my lip to keep from crying. Rome. That was our first stop, a place I'd only seen in movies, dreamed of in silence. Now it was real. As the plane took off, I looked out the window. The Texas lights sparkled below like the tears I refused to shed. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know how long we'd last or how far we'd go. But I knew this much. They took everything from me. Now I had nothing left to lose, and that made me the most dangerous woman in the world. Rome smelled like fresh bread, old stone, and something sweet I couldn't quite name. Maybe freedom, maybe joy, maybe revenge. It was my first time on a plane in over 20 years. My legs cramped, my back ached, and I hadn't slept a wink, but I couldn't stop smiling. Ruth snored beside me the entire flight, head bobbing like a pigeon. Dottie held my hand during takeoff and whispered every prayer she knew in both English and half-remembered Latin. Maxine read a paperback thriller and sipped tomato juice like we were on a cruise, not fugitives on a mission of redemption. We landed in the golden blush of morning, with the eternal city stretching out below like a dream you don't want to wake from. Cobblestone streets, flower boxes hanging from windows, a man playing violin by a fountain. My God, I wanted to cry. We checked into a small pensione in Trastevere, nothing fancy, just clean sheets, warm bread in the mornings, and a view of ivy-draped buildings that made you believe in poetry again. The clerk didn't blink when 4 American women with gray hair and suspiciously few suitcases walked in. I suppose Rome had seen stranger things. That first day, we walked until our feet gave out. Ruth bargained with a street vendor for scarves we didn't need. Dottie bought postcards and wrote one to her high school sweetheart, who'd passed away 15 years ago. Maxine flirted with a cafe owner named Luca, who brought us tiramisu on the house. And me? I stood in front of the Colosseum and let the wind wash over my face. I was nobody's burden, nobody's discarded mother. I was Eleanor Grace Miller, alive. But freedom has a funny way of stirring up the ghosts. On our 3rd night, I opened my email. I shouldn't have, but curiosity is a wicked thing. There were 10 messages from Karen. The subject line on the most recent one read, "What have you done?" I didn't open it. I didn't need to. I could already hear her voice in my head, shocked, panicked, furious. The house was gone. The money was gone. So was I. Maxine found me out on the terrace with my laptop in my lap and a glass of wine untouched. She sat beside me, her knee bumping mine. "You okay?" she asked. "I don't feel bad," I whispered, surprised by my own words. I thought I'd feel guilty. She lit a cigarette, even though she wasn't supposed to. "They had a choice, Ellie. They chose themselves. You just chose you back." The next day, we took a train to Florence. I'd always wanted to see the Duomo. Standing inside that cathedral, beneath a dome painted with heaven and hell, I thought about George, about the promises we made. I told him I'd take care of the kids no matter what. I never thought I'd need to protect myself from them. That night, I found the letters. We were staying in a tiny rental with peeling wallpaper and a creaky bed, and I'd unpacked my suitcase to find a lost sock. That's when I saw the folder. It had been tucked into a side pocket I rarely used, a manila folder with George's handwriting. There were 6 letters, all addressed to me, dated over a span of 5 years before he died. I read them in silence, sitting on the edge of the bed while the city hummed outside. In them, George talked about the kids, how he'd noticed their entitlement, their manipulation, how he worried about how they treated me when he wasn't around. He wrote about conversations with Luke that chilled him, suggestions that maybe it's time Mom moved out, even back when I was perfectly healthy. He'd seen the writing on the wall and hadn't known how to stop it. And then came the last letter. It was written just weeks before his heart gave out. "Ellie, if you're reading this, I hope to God I was wrong. But if they've turned on you, if you're alone, please remember this. You are worth more than what they've made you believe. Don't let them bury you before your time. Fight back. In whatever way you can. You've always been stronger than me. I cried like a baby. I clutched that letter to my chest and rocked on that bed, the pain of it and the love of it washing over me like fire. He knew. Even then, he knew. The next morning, I told the girls everything. Ruth was the first to speak. Then we raise hell, she said. Maxine leaned in. I know a guy who still has contacts in media. We tell your story. All of it. Dottie nodded, eyes wide. We go public. Elder abuse, financial betrayal. You're not the only one, Ellie. You could help others. And just like that, my quiet escape became a mission. We reached out to Jack Winston again, who helped us write the story. He sent it to a journalist friend in New York, Megan Luce, with a syndicated podcast and a following of older women hungry for truth. Within days, Megan called. She wanted to fly out to meet us. Said she'd been looking for a story like this for years. And while we waited, we traveled. Venice, Nice, Lisbon. Everywhere we went, we danced. We laughed. We took pictures that looked like they belonged in a calendar for fierce grandmothers. And deep down, I knew something was shifting inside me. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was healing. But as I stood on a beach in Portugal, the wind in my hair and the surf licking at my ankles, my phone buzzed. A number I didn't recognize. I picked up, expecting a hotel confirmation. Instead, I heard a voice I hadn't heard in years. Grandma? I nearly dropped the phone. It was Emily, my youngest granddaughter. She was crying. I found you, she said. Please, don't hang up. My heart stuttered in my chest. Emily, I know what they did. Mom and Uncle Luke. I saw the letters. I saw the podcast. I just want to talk to you. Please. And just like that, the ground shifted again. The past wasn't done with me, but neither was the future. I didn't answer her right away. The call ended with a promise. I told Emily I needed time. I said I wasn't ready. My hand shook so badly, I almost dropped the phone into the Atlantic. Ruth had to take it from me and place it on the lounge chair while I just stood there, frozen, staring at the water. She sounded sincere, Dottie whispered later that evening as we sat on the rooftop terrace of our guest house. The Lisbon sky stretched above us in shades of honey and blue. The sun was setting on another perfect day, and yet the past had risen up to find me again, this time with the voice of a child I once rocked to sleep. She's still one of them, Maxine said, firm. Don't let a soft voice fool you. But I couldn't stop thinking about her. Emily had been different, quiet, observant. She used to follow me around the garden when she was little, pulling weeds and asking questions about birds. I'd saved her drawings, her crayon letters, and she was the only one who hadn't stopped calling me until Karen cut me off from the grandkids altogether. She was 16 now, almost grown, maybe old enough to see things for what they were, or maybe this was another trick, another setup. 2 days later, I got a text, just a photo. It was my old house, but not as I remembered it. The porch was stripped bare. The rose bushes were gone. The shutters I painted sky blue with George one summer were now a dull beige. Below it, a single message. They trashed it. I'm sorry. I stared at the photo for a long time. My throat clenched like I was being strangled. They hadn't just sold my house. They had gutted it, erased everything I had built. I showed the picture to the girls. Ruth looked away. Dottie's eyes filled with tears. Maxine stared hard at it, then flicked her cigarette into the wind. Time to go public, she said. The interview with Megan Luce happened in a quiet cafe overlooking the Douro River. She brought her recording equipment in a simple backpack and wore no makeup. She sat down with a warmth that felt like a hug and said, "Tell me everything." And I did. I told her about the sacrifice, the long nights working double shifts, the birthdays I made special with pennies and prayers. I told her about the manipulation, the lies, the betrayal that bled into my bones. I told her about the night they took me from my home, like I was furniture that no longer matched the room. When I finished, Megan took my hand and said, "You are not alone. You have no idea how many women have written me about stories like this. But yours is going to open eyes." She aired the podcast a week later. It exploded. Hundreds of thousands of downloads, messages from women across the country, survivors of the same betrayal, daughters who regretted it, sons who'd watched their mothers fade in silence. I became a symbol, not because I wanted to, but because I had survived. Karen sent me a message the next day. How dare you? Luke tried calling twice. David left a voicemail full of slurred anger and veiled threats. I deleted them all. But then, Emily emailed me. She said she had left home, that she was staying with her aunt on her father's side, that she couldn't look at her mother anymore without hearing my story in her head. She wanted to meet, not in Texas, anywhere. Please, she wrote. I just want to know you again. Maxine warned me. Ruth was hesitant. Dottie squeezed my hand and said, sometimes healing means opening a door. Just one more time. So I picked the place. Savannah, Georgia, a city that smelled of magnolia and ghosts. It had always been on my list. We flew in the next week. Emily was waiting in Forsyth Park, sitting on a bench beneath a moss-draped oak. She stood when she saw me, eyes wide, tears already brimming. She looked like her mother used to, before Karen turned cold. But there was something else in Emily's face, something raw, something searching. Hi, Grandma, she said. My voice nearly failed me. Hi, sweetheart. We walked for hours. She asked questions about George, about my childhood, about the day they took me. She told me she'd found the letters by accident, digging through Karen's filing cabinet looking for her birth certificate. She told me she confronted them and that Karen slapped her. I couldn't stay after that, she whispered. I looked at her, this young woman, still half a girl, and something in me cracked open. I didn't want to carry the weight of anger anymore. I didn't want revenge. I wanted restoration. Not for them. For me? I hugged her so tightly, I think I left fingerprints on her soul. When I returned to the girls that night, I told them everything. Ruth wiped away a tear. Dottie smiled softly. Maxine said, well, damn. Guess there's hope for at least one of them. We spent another week in Savannah. Emily joined us for dinners, for walks by the water, for stories under the stars. It was awkward at first, then beautiful, like learning to breathe again after a long time underwater. One night, she turned to me and said, what if we started something, like a place, for women like you, like us? I didn't answer right away, but the next morning, over coffee and grits, I said, we're going to build it. I didn't know how yet, but I had the money. I had the name, the Eleanor Grace Foundation, and I had a granddaughter who was willing to fight with me instead of against me. The past was a wound, but the future, oh, the future was a fire just waiting to be lit. The Eleanor Grace Foundation began as an idea scribbled on a napkin over pancakes in a diner off River Street. Emily had drawn little stars around the name, her handwriting still loopy and unsure, like a child's. Mine was blocky and firm, unbending in the ways life had made me. We didn't know where to start, but we had a mission. To protect women like me. Mothers, grandmothers, widows, women who had been erased, silenced, used, and abandoned by the very people they gave everything to. It wasn't just about money. It was about dignity. Emily took the reins. She had a sharp mind and a fire in her belly that reminded me of George. She helped register the foundation, build the website, write the copy for the landing page. She contacted senior advocates and legal advisors. She set up a GoFundMe, and it went viral. Hundreds of women wrote in, sharing their stories, and thousands of others donated with messages like, this happened to my mom. Thank you for speaking up. I thought I was alone. We started small. A pilot program in Savannah, a free legal clinic once a week, resource packets mailed to women in nursing homes, support groups run on Zoom. My name on the homepage felt surreal, like someone I once knew but hadn't fully met until now. Meanwhile, the media wouldn't stop calling. Newsweek, CNN, NPR. They wanted my story, but I turned most of them down. I wasn't a spectacle. I wasn't a trend. I was a woman who'd survived and built something from the ashes. I didn't want attention. I wanted impact, but one interview I agreed to was with a local Savannah station. The reporter, a woman my age named Lorraine, asked gently at the end, if you could say one thing to the people who put you in that nursing home, what would it be? I looked at the camera. My voice didn't shake. I forgive you, but I'll never forget who I became because of you. That clip went everywhere. Karen saw it. She left me a voicemail after 6 months of silence. I never listened to it. Didn't need to. Whatever she had to say, she'd had decades to say it before. The chapter was closed. Luke tried to sue me, claimed I stole the house out from under them. The judge dismissed the case in less than 10 minutes. I didn't even show up in person. Maxine did, and from what I heard, she destroyed him in her closing statement. David moved out of state. I haven't heard from him since. Fine by me. And Emily, she became my shadow and my star. She traveled with me when we opened our first foundation home in upstate New York, a cozy 5-bedroom house where women could live safely after being displaced by family abuse or neglect. We named the home Grace House. When we cut the ribbon, I cried so hard my knees buckled. Ruth had to hold me up. Speaking of Ruth, she met someone. Yes, that Ruth. It happened on a cruise ship we all took to Alaska the following spring. His name was Dennis, widower, bad dancer, great with chocolate martinis. She said he made her laugh like nobody else ever had. They now spend half the year in Florida, arguing over shuffleboard and pretending not to be madly in love. Dottie started a poetry blog that somehow gained over followers. She writes about grief and healing, and every entry ends with a little line just for me. And still, Eleanor rises. Maxine. Oh, Maxine. She's our legal director now, runs her mouth in court like she was born in a courtroom. She wears red lipstick every day and claims it's armor. And me? I'm still traveling, still telling the story, still fighting. The last thing I did before we closed the year was visit my old house, not to confront them, not to mourn, just to see. It had been repainted. The porch was redone. New owners, a young couple with a baby swing out front. I stood across the street, unnoticed. Just an old woman in sunglasses and a scarf. I smiled. That house wasn't my home anymore. Home was wherever I stood in my truth. Wherever women gathered to lift each other up. Wherever Eleanor Grace Miller refused to be forgotten. And as I walked away, a breeze swept through the street, carrying the scent of roses from somewhere nearby. I closed my eyes, and for a moment, I could almost feel George's hand in mine. We did it, I whispered. We made it. And in that still, sacred moment, I knew. This wasn't the end of my story. It was only the beginning. The cruise ship was like a floating palace, white and gleaming against the sapphire water, with gold lettering across the side. Celestial Dawn. We boarded in Seattle under a canopy of cherry blossoms, their petals drifting in the breeze like a blessing. The air smelled of salt and fresh starts. It was our reward, our celebration. One last promise fulfilled before the next chapter unfolded. I stood on the upper deck with Ruth, Dottie, and Maxine as the ship pulled away from shore. Emily was below in the cabin, finishing a virtual meeting for the foundation. She was leading a grant proposal to open 3 more homes in the Midwest. She had grown into this fierce, radiant version of herself, and I thanked God every day that she had found her way back to me and to herself. "Can you believe we're doing this?" Dottie asked, her hair wrapped in a floral scarf that fluttered in the wind. "We should have done this 30 years ago," Ruth said, sipping champagne and laughing. "But hey, late is better than never." Maxine pointed toward the horizon. "Look at that sky. I want to paint it with a martini in my hand." We all laughed. It was the kind of laughter that feels like air in the lungs after you've nearly drowned. That night, we dressed in our best and had dinner in the ship's ballroom. The lighting was soft, warm, like candlelight. The chairs were plush velvet, the silverware heavier than necessary, and the waiters smiled like they were in on some grand, elegant joke. Halfway through dessert, molten chocolate cake with raspberry drizzle, the band began to play. Not loud, not showy, just the soft strains of an old Ella Fitzgerald tune. And something happened in me. I stood. "I want to dance," I said. "For the first time in years, I want to dance." Maxine raised her eyebrows. Ruth beamed. Dottie clapped softly, already reaching for her camera. There was no one to dance with, no partner waiting on the other side of the ballroom. Just me, in a navy dress I'd bought on a whim in Florence, with shoes that pinched and a heart that was too full. But I walked out there anyway. The band watched me. The other passengers looked up, and I closed my eyes, and I danced. I swayed, slow and graceful, to music that wrapped around me like memory. I danced for every night I cried alone, for every holiday my children forgot, for every woman who sat in a sterile room and wondered if her life had already ended. I danced for George, for Emily, for myself. At some point, I felt arms around me. Someone had stepped onto the floor. Strong, steady hands guided mine. I opened my eyes. Dennis, Ruth's gentleman friend, smiling gently. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. More people joined. older couples, solo dancers. A small sea of strangers moving together under chandelier light. We danced, not like we were young again, but like we had finally remembered who we were. The music slowed, the final note lingered, and then the applause came. Not wild, not showy, just warm, deep, true. Back at the table, Emily had joined the girls. She stood and opened her arms as I walked toward her. "You looked like you were flying," she whispered, her voice thick with tears. "I was," I said. "For the first time in my life, I wasn't dancing for anyone else." Later that night, we stood on the balcony outside our shared suite. The sea stretched endlessly, moonlight sparkling on the water. The northern lights began to appear, green and violet waves undulating in the dark. We watched in silence for a long time. "Do you ever miss them?" Emily asked quietly. "My children?" She nodded. I took a breath. "I miss who I thought they were. I miss the hope, but not the pain." She nodded, resting her head on my shoulder. "I'm sorry they hurt you." I kissed the top of her head. "You didn't. And you're helping fix what they broke. That's more than I ever dreamed." The sky danced for us. The water whispered of new beginnings. And I stood there, not as a victim, not even as a survivor. I was Eleanor Grace Miller, mother, grandmother, founder, fighter. And in that moment, I knew I had finally come home. Not to a place, but to myself. We reached Juneau just as the sun began to set behind the icy peaks, casting golden light across the ship's bow. The harbor was quiet, gentle waves lapping against the dock as we stepped onto solid ground, bundled in layers, our breath curling in the cold Alaskan air. The others decided to explore the local shops and try some crab legs. Emily and I, though, took a different route. We booked a small helicopter tour, something we'd never done before. Neither of us had the stomach for heights. But that was the point. "I want to see the world from the top," I told her. For once. The pilot, a woman named Sam with a voice like gravel and the calm of someone who's seen storms up close, helped us into our seats. Emily gripped my hand as the rotors began to spin. I grinned like a fool. We lifted into the sky, and the world below began to shrink. Juneau became a miniature town in a snow globe. The mountains opened up, vast and white and wild. Glaciers cracked and shimmered like rivers of ancient glass. We hovered over one of the largest glaciers, and the sun broke through the clouds, turning the ice into something almost holy. I'd never seen anything so vast, so untouched. It made me feel small, not in a bad way, but in a beautiful, awe-filled way, as if everything I'd endured was a prelude to this moment. "I'm glad you didn't give up," Emily said softly over the headset. I turned to her, tears stinging my eyes. "I almost did, you know, but then you called." She squeezed my hand. "I think you saved me too." We landed on a flat stretch of ice, wrapped in thermal blankets as we stepped out into the crisp air. It was just us and the silence of snow, the kind that hushes everything. Pain, memory, fear. I took out the last letter George had written, the one I'd carried with me all this time, and I let it go. I watched it drift across the ice, carried by the wind, weightless. It fluttered, spun, and disappeared into the white. It was time to stop carrying the weight. Later that night, we returned to the ship and found the others waiting with champagne. "To Eleanor," Ruth toasted, holding her glass high. "The fiercest damn woman I've ever met." "To Grace," said Dottie. "In every form she comes in." "To second chances," Maxine added, and winked, and Emily leaned in, clinking her glass gently to mine. "To beginnings." We drank under the stars, wrapped in blankets and love. Laughter echoed across the deck, carried by the sea. And when I closed my eyes that night, I dreamed not of the past, but of all the mornings still ahead. Not as a mother forgotten, not as a woman discarded, but as Eleanor Grace Miller, reborn, redeemed, and finally, irrevocably free. The final morning of the cruise arrived wrapped in fog and a quiet stillness, the kind that makes you feel like the world is pausing just long enough for you to say goodbye. I stood at the rail of the ship, coffee in hand, watching the coastline of Alaska slip further behind us. I thought I'd feel sad, but I didn't. I felt full. Emily joined me, still in pajamas and a wool scarf wrapped haphazardly around her neck. "Today feels different," she said. "It is," I replied. "It's the last day of running." She looked confused. "Running from what?" I turned to face her fully. From grief, from guilt, from everything I thought I failed to be. Her eyes softened. You didn't fail, Grandma. They did. I smiled gently. Maybe, but I don't want my life to be defined by what others did to me. I want it to be defined by what I chose to do anyway. After breakfast, we held a small ceremony. Just the 5 of us. We gathered in the private lounge, away from the crowds. There was no stage, no speeches, just stories. We took turns sharing the names of women we'd known who were lost to silence, who were discarded or forgotten. Ruth spoke of her sister. Dottie read a poem she'd written the night before. Maxine lit 5 candles, one for each of us, and one for every woman we'd met on our journey who never got to live hers freely. And I told the story of my life. Not the pain, not the betrayal, but the parts I'd rediscovered. Planting tomatoes with George, rocking babies on the porch, dancing barefoot in the kitchen to old Motown records. I told them about my first kiss behind the bleachers, the time I hitchhiked across the state line with my best friend at 17, the Christmas I surprised the kids with a puppy named Comet. I told them about the fire inside me, and I told them how, for years, I let others pour water on it. But here's the thing about fire, I said, voice steady. If you protect the spark long enough, it will burn again. We each took our candle and set it afloat in a glass bowl, watching the flames drift and flicker on the water's surface. I looked around at the women who saved me, who reminded me who I was, and at Emily, my legacy and my future. I'm going home, I said softly. 4 heads turned toward me. I'm not going back to Texas, I clarified, but I'm building something permanent, a real place, a headquarters for the foundation, a retreat, a home for any woman who needs one. Maxine grinned. Where? I took a breath. Where it all began. Savannah. They all nodded. It made sense. It always had. 6 months later, Grace Haven opened its doors. It was a white 2-story house with green shutters and a wide porch that wrapped around like arms ready to embrace. We built it with donations, love, and the sheer determination of women who had refused to be erased. Emily became the executive director. Ruth and Dennis hosted monthly supper clubs. Dottie ran writing workshops. Maxine gave legal consultations pro bono every Friday. And me? I sat on that porch every morning with a cup of coffee and watched the world come to us. Women arriving with trembling hands and broken stories, leaving with light in their eyes. Sometimes I told my story. Other times I just listened, because I had learned something powerful. Sometimes, the greatest redemption isn't just surviving what they did to you. It's choosing to become someone they never saw coming. Someone stronger. Someone free. Someone unforgettable. My name is Eleanor Grace Miller. And this is my legacy. Not in buildings, not in money, but in the fire I passed on, and the women who now carry it forward. It was our first Thanksgiving at Grace Haven. The sun poured through the tall windows, turning the wood floors golden. The air was thick with the smell of cinnamon, roasted turkey, and fresh cornbread. Outside, the leaves had just started to fall in Savannah, reds and oranges blanketing the lawn, crunching under every footstep. There were wind chimes on the porch, whispering memories into the breeze. Inside there was laughter. Real laughter. The kind that came from bellies, not politeness. The long dining table, donated by a woman who'd once been told by her husband that she wasn't fit to host, was now covered in mismatched plates and silverware, candles flickering between serving bowls. Around it sat 22 women. Some wore pearls, others wore jeans, all wore hope on their faces. Grace Haven had been open for just 3 months. 3 months, and we had already changed lives. There was Olivia, who escaped a marriage that kept her silent for 35 years. There was Harriet, who was left homeless after her adult son drained her savings and disappeared. There was Rosa, who at 71 finally learned to read, and now left sticky notes around the house with words she loved. Light, soft, beginning. I sat at the head of the table, not because I asked to, but because the others insisted. They said I was the reason they were there, but I looked around and knew the truth. They were the reason I was whole again. I stood to give a toast, not a speech. Just a few words. I raised my glass. Apple cider with a splash of bourbon. Just how George used to make it. This year, I began. I didn't lose everything. The room went still. I found everything I was missing. I looked around, at Ruth and Dennis, seated side by side with their hands intertwined, at Maxine, carving the turkey like she was presiding over a courtroom, at Dottie, passing out her homemade apple pie and handing napkins to a girl with tears in her eyes, at Emily, my granddaughter, the fiercest, kindest soul I'd ever known, standing behind me like a lighthouse. I found myself, I said, voice trembling. I found family, not by blood, but by choice. I found purpose in the ashes of pain. And I want you all to know, this isn't just a home for the broken, it's a home for the rising. The room erupted in clinks of glasses and soft weeping and applause that felt like music made just for us. Later, as the sun dipped low and the candles flickered, I walked out to the porch. Emily joined me. "You never told me what you wished for," she said, nudging my shoulder. "What do you mean?" "That night in Alaska," she said, "when you let George's letter go. What did you wish for when you released it?" I smiled. "I wished," I said, "that someday someone would know me for who I really was. And now? Now, I wish that someone else will see their own worth before it's too late." She leaned into me, resting her head on my shoulder. "You're changing the world, Grandma." "No, baby," I whispered. "We are." And we sat there, 2 generations of fire, watching the stars begin to appear, one by one, like tiny promises written across the sky. Winter came softly to Savannah. Unlike the sharp cold I remembered from Texas winters, here it arrived like a gentle hush, crisp mornings, the scent of pine and clove in the air, soft blankets, and slower walks under gray skies. Grace Haven glowed with string lights and quiet miracles. Each room now held a story. One belonged to Clara, who arrived with only a suitcase and a photograph of her late husband. Her children had emptied her bank account and left her in a motel 2 towns over. She didn't speak much at first, but after a few weeks in our garden, her hands found their way back to the earth and to her voice. Another belonged to Naomi, a former nurse who had been placed in assisted living against her will. She taught yoga in the morning now, sitting in a chair, leading breathing exercises for women whose hearts were still learning to trust again. Every time someone new arrived, I saw myself, a reflection of who I was that day in the beige nursing home, suitcase by my feet, faith slipping from my fingers. And each time I welcomed her in, I grew stronger. In January, we held a special gathering, our first night of names. It was Dottie's idea, and it was beautiful. We each stood in a circle, holding a small candle, and said the name of a woman we wanted to honor, a mother, a friend, a version of ourselves we'd left behind. When it came to me, I said simply, "Eleanor Grace Miller, the one who stayed too quiet for too long." And I let that silence stretch. Not out of grief, but respect. That woman, that version of me, deserved to be remembered too. She kept going when no one thanked her. She loved even when it hurt, and she finally stood up when it mattered most. After the ceremony, Emily found me in the kitchen, tears drying on her cheeks. "I want to write a book," she said. "About you. About all of this." I laughed. "You think people would want to read about a grandma who sold her house out from under her kids and ran off to Italy with a pack of retired rebels?" "Yes," she said, dead serious. "Because they're out there, Grandma. All the women who feel stuck, who think it's too late, who think they're too old to change anything. I want them to know it's never too late." That night, I started jotting notes in a spiral notebook. Memories, lessons, truths no one teaches you until it's nearly too late. I didn't know if it would become a book, or a blog, or a box of letters for the next generation. But I knew one thing. My voice wasn't going quiet again. February brought unexpected news. The foundation had been nominated for a national award, the Women of Strength Legacy Grant, awarded to initiatives that empowered older women with dignity, autonomy, and voice. Maxine read the email aloud in the common room. Ruth screamed. Dottie cried. Emily danced me around the coffee table. A week later, the local news team returned to film a segment. This time, they didn't just interview me, they interviewed all of us, the women of Grace Haven. Each one shared her story, and the camera captured something no words could fully hold: their power. When the segment aired, we received over 3,000 emails in 48 hours. 3,000. Women asking for help, daughters trying to help their mothers, grandmothers asking if there was a Grace Haven near them. We were overwhelmed, and then we were determined. We began to expand. Another home opened in Asheville, one more in Michigan, and a third planned for Oregon in the fall. And through it all, I kept my morning ritual. Coffee on the porch, a notebook in my lap, a quiet prayer on my lips. Not for justice anymore, for joy, for the life I never thought I'd get to live. And every so often, I'd see a woman walk up our path for the first time, shoulders hunched, eyes guarded, and I'd rise to meet her. I'd take her hand, and I'd whisper, just loud enough for her heart to hear, "You're not lost, you're just getting started." Spring bloomed early that year, as if even the trees and flowers had grown impatient for more life. Grace Haven was covered in blossoms, wisteria curling around the porch railings, daffodils bursting from the garden like little trumpets of hope. Everything smelled fresh, alive, like the world itself had turned a page. And I, Eleanor Grace Miller, was finally ready to write the next chapter. Emily's book idea had taken root. We called it Not Done Yet. She had taken my stories, my letters, and pieces of the women I'd met along the way and turned them into something more beautiful than I ever could have imagined. It wasn't just my memoir. It was a testimony, a declaration. We launched it with a garden party right here at Grace Haven. We invited every woman who had ever passed through our doors and their families. Yes, even some of the children who had once been the reason they came to us in the first place. People do change. Not all, but some. Enough to give you a little more faith in this world. Karen didn't come. David didn't write. Luke sent a bitter message through a lawyer, saying the book defamed him. We didn't reply, but Emily's parents, her father and stepmother, came, and they brought flowers. "Thank you," her father said to me, his voice low, "for giving her back to us stronger." That night, after the guests had gone, after the lights were taken down and the cake plates stacked in the sink, I sat on the porch again. Same chair, same mug, same stars above, and I finally let myself remember everything. Not just the pain, but the love too. George, the babies I held, the home I once had, the silence I endured, the fight I found, and the legacy I'd built with bare, battered hands. Maxine joined me, a blanket over her lap. Ruth and Dennis waved goodnight from their little cottage across the garden. Dottie was already inside, working on a new poem about reclaiming your bloom. Maxine nudged my arm. "You did it, you know." "Did what?" "You rewrote the ending." I looked at her, eyes soft with the kind of peace that comes only after the storm. "No," I whispered. "I just started telling the truth." She chuckled, that gravelly, no-nonsense laugh that had carried us through the worst of it. And in that moment, I felt it. I wasn't waiting anymore. Not to be chosen, not to be heard, not to be seen. I was here, fully. And for every woman who'd ever felt small, who'd ever been pushed aside or silenced or forgotten, I left these words, carved not in stone, but in the hearts of everyone we touched. You are not too old. You are not too late. You are not done yet. And neither was I. The day the award letter arrived, I was making lemon bars in the kitchen with Emily. The sunlight poured through the windows, warm and syrupy, catching on the flower dust in the air. We were laughing, God laughing, about something ridiculous Ruth had said the day before. The way her dentures had flown halfway across the table during a heated game of Scrabble. And then the mail came. It wasn't fancy, just a cream-colored envelope with our names typed neatly on the front. Eleanor G. Miller and Emily Grace Weston, the Eleanor Grace Foundation. Emily opened it first. Her hands trembled halfway through, and she passed it to me without a word. I took it, heart slow and heavy, and read, "Congratulations. You have been awarded the Women of Strength Legacy Grant. In recognition of your tireless work empowering women over and restoring dignity to those too long forgotten, we honor you with a lifetime endowment to continue and expand your mission." I sank into the nearest chair. Not because of the money, though Lord knew it would help us build 3 more Grace Havens by year's end. It was the words, "We honor you." No one had ever said that to me before. Emily knelt beside me, her face glowing. "You did this," she said. "You made this world." "No," I whispered. "We made it together. We held a celebration the following weekend, not just for the grant, but for the lives we had helped repair. Over 100 women gathered in the garden, some in wheelchairs, some with walkers, some with silver braids and lipstick, some with stories written in the lines around their eyes. There were hugs and reunions, songs sung off-key, and speeches given through tears. They crowned me with a flower wreath Ruth had made herself. A silly thing, really. Daisies and ivy. But I wore it like a queen, because for the first time, I understood what royalty really meant. It wasn't about ruling. It was about rising. That night, after the last lantern had been dimmed and the guests had gone to sleep, I sat in my room, alone. The award certificate rested on the table beside me. Next to it, George's last letter, the copy I'd printed and framed, tucked in the corner with a photo of us from our wedding day. Young, bright-eyed, completely unaware of the world to come. And for the first time in my life, I spoke to him out loud. "I did it, George. You were right. I was stronger than I ever knew." My voice cracked. But I wasn't alone. A soft knock on the door interrupted me. Emily peeked in. "Sorry," she said. "Just wanted to say goodnight." "Come sit," I said, patting the bed beside me. She curled up like she did when she was little, her head on my shoulder. "I'm proud of you," I told her. "I'm proud of you," she whispered. "You turned ashes into light." We sat there, no need for more words, the silence between us full of everything sacred. And when she finally left, I stood at the window, looking out over the garden where so many had healed, where I had healed. And I realized something. This wasn't a second chance at life. It was life, the one I had always deserved. And with the moon glowing above and spring thick in the air, I closed my eyes and smiled, because I had finally come home, not to a house, but to myself. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.